Tonight, we step into a world of candlelight, honor, and shadows. Subscribe before we begin so you'll never miss another journey into the forgotten corners of time. Welcome, traveler of the night. Take a slow, steady breath. In through your nose and gently out through your mouth. Let the noise of the day melt away. The world outside grows softer, quieter, until only this moment remains. Just you, your breath, and the warmth of an unseen fire somewhere deep in the heart of history. We drift now toward a time long before love was texted in emojis, or swiped left or right. A time when romance was bound by duty, whispered through walls, and written not on glowing screens, but on parchment and hearts. Tonight's story is not just about history, it's about longing, courage, and the quiet rebellion of the human heart. Imagine cobblestone paths slick with rain, the scent of wood smoke in the air, the flicker of torches casting trembling light along castle walls. The year might be 1325 or perhaps 1450, it doesn't matter. What matters is that somewhere, under the same stars that still watch over us now, two souls are trying to find each other in a world that forbids them to. In the Middle Ages, love was not a simple thing. It was arranged, controlled, negotiated, sometimes even punished. The idea of dating as we know it simply didn't exist. Instead, there were alliances, contracts, and careful negotiations sealed with dowries, cattle, or promises whispered between families. If you were lucky, affection might come after marriage. If you weren't, you learned to live beside someone chosen for you, not by you. For nobles, marriage was politics. A noble daughter was a link in a chain of alliances. A noble son, a bargaining chip for land and title. Some couples met for the first time on their wedding day, smiling through nerves and obligation as their fates were bound together before God and witness. Still, somewhere behind the ceremonies and the gilded halls, love found its quiet corners. A glance, a letter, a shared laugh. They were tiny revolutions in a world where emotion was forbidden to rule.
For peasants, love was no less complicated. You might marry because your family needed help with the fields, or because two neighboring farms agreed to share a well. But even here, hearts strayed and stories bloomed. You might meet someone at the village market, your hands brushing over the same bundle of herbs, or you might fall for the sound of laughter on a cold morning walk. These were small, fleeting moments, but in a life of labor and hardship, they meant everything. Romance, for most, was not grand or poetic. It was built from survival. A husband and wife working the land together, a stolen conversation before the priest's bell, a shared meal after a long day's toil. This was love in its most ordinary, beautiful form. The kind of love that grew not from desire, but from endurance. But among the nobility, a different kind of love took hold, one built on dreams and distance. It was called courtly love, and it was less about passion than performance. A knight would pledge his devotion to a lady, often one already married, swearing loyalty and adoration without ever expecting anything in return. He might write poems, fight tournaments in her name, or wear her favor tied to his arm. She, in turn, would respond with poise, maintaining an air of mystery and restraint. Their love was meant to be pure, untouchable, almost sacred in its suffering. This idea of distant, impossible affection was born from boredom and beauty alike. It gave meaning to lonely hearts trapped in duty, and though it was bound by strict rules, it still allowed the human soul to breathe. To love from afar was to dream in secret, to find warmth and longing when the world itself felt cold. Tokens were their language: a glove, a handkerchief, a ribbon, a ring. Each held a message that words could never safely speak. A woman might give her knight a token before a battle. He might carry it like a prayer. It was their version of thinking of you, a silent confession sewn into cloth and hope. To the world, these gestures seemed harmless, but to those who exchanged them, they were everything. Even among peasants, simple tokens carried the same weight. A carved spoon, a woven cord, a sprig of wildflowers tucked into a sleeve, all quiet signs of affection. Sometimes they were noticed and whispered about. Sometimes they weren't. But in every case, they spoke the same timeless truth: love finds a way, even in the hardest soil. So as you lie here now, listening, breathing, and slowly drifting, remember this: love has never been easy. It has always been fragile and brave, hidden and loud all at once. Whether in a king's hall or a farmer's hut, whether sealed by vows or silence, love has always been the same. Two people trying to find a moment of understanding in a world that rarely allows it. Take another slow breath and let your mind settle into the stillness. The firelight in your imagination burns lower. The world grows softer. The noise fades. The past draws near. You are safe, calm, and at peace. Let yourself drift as the story begins. For tonight we'll walk through the corridors of history, where the heart was both prisoner and poet, and where every stolen glance carried the weight of a lifetime. This is what dating was like in medieval times. In the medieval world, love was not left to chance. It was mapped, measured, and in some ways controlled as tightly as a kingdom's borders. If the heart is wild by nature, the Middle Ages tried their best to tame it. Every whisper, every promise, every union had its place in a hierarchy older than memory itself. The church stood at the center of it all, the silent guardian of morality. Love, in its eyes, was not a private affair. It was a matter of divine order. To marry was to serve God's purpose, not the desires of flesh and feeling. And so, marriage became sacred, unbreakable, and often entirely without affection. The union of two souls was less about passion and more about obedience.
Imagine two families, seated at a long table. One offers their daughter, the other their son. Between them lies parchment, sealed in wax and blessed by faith. They exchange not only hands, but fortunes, fields, and futures. No hearts flutter here, only pens scratch and heads nod. The bride may not even see her husband until the day she is led to him. She might be 14. He might be twice her age. And yet the priest's words will bind them tighter than love ever could. To the church, marriage was a holy bond that reflected the union between Christ and his followers. To the nobility, it was a tool, a ladder of status and survival. A man might marry for dowry, a woman for security, and both would learn to call it duty. The rarest marriages were those that held a spark of affection, a quiet understanding that grew despite the rules that forbade it. But even within these bindings, people found ways to love. There were rules, yes, but rules invite rebellion. The poets of the time began to sing of courtly love, a strange and beautiful idea that dared to separate romance from marriage. In these songs, love became something noble and pure, free from the politics of dowry and name. It was meant to elevate the spirit, not satisfy the body. It was impossible love, the kind that hurts and heals in equal measure. A knight might fall for a lady he could never have. She might be his lord's wife, or a noble far above his station. Yet in that distance lay the beauty. He would pledge himself to her service, fight in her honor, and write verses that spoke her name in secrecy. To love her was to become better, to strive, to ache, to remain faithful to a dream.
But courtly love had its rules, too. It was not chaos, it was ceremony. A knight could never demand. A lady could never yield too soon. Desire was to be controlled, shaped into poetry and patience. And in that restraint, something powerful was born. For when love cannot be touched, it becomes eternal. Among the common folk, these ideals trickled down in simpler forms. Songs were sung of shepherds and maidens, of secret meetings in moonlit fields, of promises whispered between shores.
Love for them was less lofty, but far more real. It smelled of bread baking, of soil, of rain. It was laughter over shared work, comfort in sickness, a hand that did not let go when life grew hard. There were still rules, of course. A man was expected to court with respect, often through the family. A woman was expected to be modest, her virtue her greatest treasure. But behind barns and markets, by rivers and firesides, affection bloomed quietly, like wildflowers in cracks of stone. Even religion could not stop it entirely. Priests preached against lust, yet they too understood that love, in its gentler form, was part of being human. Some even blessed secret unions, turning a blind eye to custom for the sake of two souls who simply wished to belong to one another. It's strange, isn't it, that in a world ruled by rules, love still found its way, like water through rock, soft but unstoppable. The same feeling that binds hearts today, whispered through the halls of castles and the huts of farmers long ago. As night deepens, imagine yourself there, a quiet village beneath a cold sky. Somewhere, a candle burns behind a shuttered window. A young man walks home through the mist, his heart full of hope. Somewhere else, a girl sits by the hearth, staring into the flames, wondering if he'll find the courage to speak tomorrow. Neither knows the words for what they feel, but both know it's real. Because love, no matter how many rules are written around it, remains the same story told again and again, softly, stubbornly, forever. In a world where love was often arranged, the heart learned to hide. Desire became a secret language, spoken through glances, symbols, and parchment. For those bound by duty or distance, a letter was not just ink on page, it was breath, hope, and confession all at once. Picture the stillness of a medieval night. Candles burn low. A woman sits at a wooden desk, quill trembling in her hand. Every word she writes could destroy her, yet she writes anyway. The letter is not long. It says what cannot be said aloud. I think of you. I dream of your voice. I am afraid, but I am alive when I remember you. When it's done, she folds it carefully, presses wax over the edge, and seals it with a trembling heart. The messenger is a trusted servant, a friend, or sometimes a child paid with a coin and a loaf of bread. The risk is enormous. Letters could be intercepted, read, and condemned as sin. But love, when caged, always finds a way to fly. For knights and noblewomen, secrecy was survival. The church forbade adultery, yet many found themselves trapped in loveless unions. Courtly love, the noble idea of loving from afar, became the only safe mask for real desire. Behind the poetry and vows of service, hearts beat faster for reasons no priest could bless. These secret correspondences became their sanctuary. Lovers wrote in riddles, using metaphors only the two of them understood. A rose might mean longing. A falcon could mean devotion. A storm might whisper of jealousy. Entire romances lived and died in words alone, hidden within verses sung by minstrels or tucked into books of psalms. Even peasants found their ways to write, though most could not write at all. Their letters were spoken, remembered, passed like folk songs. A promise made at dawn might be carried in the mind for years, word for word, until the day it was finally heard again. Some stories from the time tell of women who disguised themselves as men to meet their lovers, or of men who risked execution for crossing class lines in the name of affection. These weren't fairy tales. They were the quiet revolutions of the heart, fought in the shadows of cathedrals and fields. The world was harsh, but that only made tenderness more precious. A smile shared across a crowded feast, a brief touch when passing in the hall. These were luxuries more powerful than any jewel. When love cannot be spoken, every small act becomes sacred. For many, love letters were never answered. The beloved might marry another or be taken far away. Yet even unanswered, the act of writing kept hope alive. To write was to resist forgetting. To imagine a reply was to survive. We have found fragments of these letters in time-worn manuscripts pressed between prayers and records. They are faded, but their voices still tremble through the centuries. "My only joy, though you are gone," one reads, "I will keep my faith as the moon keeps its shape, though hidden from the sun." It is strange, perhaps, how much pain people once bore for the sake of love. But it was that very pain that gave it meaning. The harder it was to reach, the deeper it seemed to feel. In a world where nothing belonged to you, not your land, not your fate, not even your own body, love was the one thing that could not be commanded. And so it thrived in secret, in folded notes, in songs sung too quietly to be noticed, in prayers whispered to stars. Love became both rebellion and refuge. As you lie here now, eyes heavy, think of that. How across time and silence, hearts have always reached out in the dark, searching for someone to feel the same. The words have changed, but the longing never has. Even now, somewhere in that distant century, two hands meet beneath a table. A letter passes between them, small and fragile as a heartbeat. And in that moment, just that small, stolen instant, love wins. Before there were dating apps, candlelit dinners, or whispered phone calls that lasted till morning, there was silence. And in that silence, people learned to speak without words. In the Middle Ages, a glance could be an entire confession. A single brush of fabric in a crowded hall could hold more meaning than 1,000 letters. It was a world of restraint, of hands hidden beneath gloves, of veils drawn low, of emotions wrapped in etiquette like secrets under lock and key. Yet somehow love found a way to breathe through it all. Imagine the dim glow of a torchlit banquet hall. Minstrels play softly in the corner, their lutes murmuring gentle chords as nobles exchange polite laughter. A knight stands across the room, his gaze finding the lady he cannot have. He dares not speak to her, not a single word, but when she turns her head, ever so slightly, just enough to meet his eyes for the briefest heartbeat, he feels the world stop. In that instant, he reads everything, her longing, her fear, her hope. And though no word is spoken, both know that they have crossed into dangerous territory, one glance at a time. For peasants, the language of touch was simpler but no less meaningful. When a man reached out to help a woman lift a bucket at the well, his rough hands brushed hers. Maybe she pulled away, pretending not to notice. Maybe she didn't. That fleeting contact was its own message, a question, an invitation, a dare. There were rules everywhere, rules about who could look, who could touch, who could even smile at whom. Breaking those rules could mean gossip, disgrace, even punishment. Yet every human soul, whether wrapped in silk or burlap, longed to be seen. That longing created a whole world of secret gestures. A glance downward could mean modesty, a half-smile, encouragement. The way one adjusted a cloak or turned away could say everything and nothing at once. Courtiers became fluent in this quiet dance, where love was not declared, but implied. Among the nobility, it was said that the eyes were the only safe way to touch. Too much could be ruined with one reckless word, but the eyes, they could linger without leaving a mark. Lovers learned to meet and part in silence,
trading emotion through stolen moments like smugglers of something forbidden and precious. In some places, the church declared these silent flirtations sinful, warning that even a glance could lead the soul astray. But how could anyone control what the heart did behind closed lids? When the world made love impossible, even the smallest expression became an act of quiet rebellion. And it wasn't always about romance. Sometimes it was just connection, the comfort of being recognized by another person in a lonely, rigid world. To be noticed even briefly meant you existed beyond your duties, beyond your role, beyond survival. Historians have found love poems from that time describing eyes that wound like arrows and glances that pierce the soul. Dramatic maybe, but when you live in a world where touch is forbidden, a look truly can feel like lightning.
And just as today, some hearts were reckless. Lovers would risk everything for one hidden meeting. A hand clasped in the dark, a kiss behind the chapel, the thrill of knowing that for a heartbeat they had broken through the wall of rules and found something real. Every society builds cages for the heart. Every generation learns how to open them quietly. For medieval lovers, the code of silence became a game of survival and devotion. You could not write freely. You could not touch freely. But the eyes, those windows of the soul, were untouchable. So they spoke through them, endlessly, hopelessly, beautifully. As you drift further into rest, imagine those candlelit halls and moonlit courtyards where no one dared to speak love's name, yet everyone felt it humming in their blood. Eyes meeting across distance, hands brushing for a breath, the entire story of a romance told in gestures too small for history to notice. And as sleep takes you deeper, remember, sometimes the quietest moments are the loudest of all. Love in the Middle Ages did not bloom freely. It was bound by laws, traditions, and invisible chains. To court someone was not an act of emotion, but an act of negotiation. Every feeling, every gesture, every promise came at a cost. The church, the family, the village, each had a say in your heart's affairs. Marriage was never just about two souls. It was a transaction between houses, fields, and fortunes. Even a simple courtship could ripple through an entire community, bringing either celebration or scandal. For nobles, the rules were elaborate. To pursue someone required permission from family elders. Gifts had to be approved. Letters could be read by servants. Meetings, if allowed, took place under watchful eyes. Even words of affection were rehearsed, softened, made respectable. And yet beneath that polished decorum, hearts burned quietly like candles under glass. Knights often swore vows of service to the ladies they admired. They called it courtly love, but this was not the love of equals. It was devotion wrapped in submission. The knight would dedicate his victories, his songs, his very honor to his lady's name, even if she could never be his. To love her was to serve her from afar, to suffer beautifully. The lady, meanwhile, was expected to remain distant, untouchable, an ideal, not a partner. It was all performance, but within that performance, something real could spark, something neither the poets nor priests could contain. Because once a heart awakens, no rule, no vow, no fence of propriety can truly silence it. Among peasants, the rules were simpler, but no less rigid. If you wished to court, you sought permission from the family first. You might bring small gifts, bread, cheese, or cloth you'd woven yourself. You'd visit during daylight hours, never too long, and always with others nearby. A promise of marriage was sacred, and breaking it could ruin a life. Love had a price, And everyone knew it. A dowry could make or break a match. A man without land might never marry at all. A woman without inheritance was seen as a burden. And if love dared to cross those boundaries between rich and poor, master and servant, it could mean exile, imprisonment, even death. But for some, that danger only made it more intoxicating. To sneak glances in church, to meet by moonlight, to whisper forbidden words. It was a rebellion wrapped in tenderness. Lovers would risk everything for what was otherwise denied to them. There are records of such stories, scattered like fragile petals in history's pages. A merchant's daughter who ran away with a blacksmith. A noblewoman who gave up her title for a soldier. A monk who fell in love with a widow and left his vows behind. Their names are mostly lost, but their courage lingers in the echoes of their choices. To love in such a world was not just a feeling, it was an act of defiance. Every stolen moment, every shared secret was a protest against the cold arithmetic of survival. Still, not everyone could afford rebellion. Most accepted their roles, their arranged marriages, their quiet lives. They learned to build affection slowly, after the vows were said. And though it may sound tragic, there was a certain beauty in that too. The slow, patient weaving of care between strangers who became partners through necessity. Sometimes those unions turned into true companionship. Two people, once bound by arrangement, finding laughter in each other's company, warmth in shared labor, comfort in routine. Love that did not begin in fire, but in coals that glowed softly through the years. It was not always romantic, but it was real. And perhaps that was the heart of medieval courtship, not the grand gestures sung by minstrels, but the quiet endurance of love that learned to survive within its boundaries. Because in the end, every generation has its own rules for love, its own ways of breaking them. And as the centuries fade, what remains is not who obeyed, but who dared. So, as you breathe slower now, imagine that world again. Narrow streets, soft moonlight, two figures meeting in secret, knowing the price of every word. And still, they choose to speak. Because even when love costs everything, silence costs more. Love in the Middle Ages did not bloom freely. It was bound by laws, traditions, and invisible chains. To court someone was not an act of emotion, but an act of negotiation. Every feeling, every gesture, every promise came at a cost. The church, the family, the village, each had a say in your heart's affairs. Marriage was never just about two souls. It was a transaction between houses, fields, and fortunes. Even a simple courtship could ripple through an entire community, bringing either celebration or scandal.
For nobles, the rules were elaborate. To pursue someone required permission from family elders. Gifts had to be approved. Letters could be read by servants. Meetings, if allowed, took place under watchful eyes. Even words of affection were rehearsed, softened, made respectable. And yet, beneath that polished decorum, hearts burned quietly like candles under glass. Knights often swore vows of service to the ladies they admired. They called it courtly love. But this was not the love of equals. It was devotion wrapped in submission. The knight would dedicate his victories, his songs, his very honor to his lady's name, even if she could never be his. To love her was to serve her from afar, to suffer beautifully. The lady, meanwhile, was expected to remain distant, untouchable, an ideal, not a partner. It was all performance. But within that performance, something real could spark, something neither the poets nor priests could contain.
Because once a heart awakens, no rule, no vow, no fence of propriety can truly silence it. Among peasants, the rules were simpler but no less rigid. If you wished to court, you sought permission from the family first. You might bring small gifts, bread, cheese, or cloth you'd woven yourself. You'd visit during daylight hours, never too long, and always with others nearby. A promise of marriage was sacred, and breaking it could ruin a life. Love had a price, and everyone knew it. A dowry could make or break a match. A man without land might never marry at all. A woman without inheritance was seen as a burden, and if love dared to cross those boundaries, between rich and poor, master and servant, it could mean exile, imprisonment, even death. But for some, that danger only made it more intoxicating. To sneak glances in church, to meet by moonlight, to whisper forbidden words. It was a rebellion wrapped in tenderness. Lovers would risk everything for what was otherwise denied to them.
There are records of such stories, scattered like fragile petals in history's pages. A merchant's daughter who ran away with a blacksmith, a noblewoman who gave up her title for a soldier, a monk who fell in love with a widow and left his vows behind. Their names are mostly lost, but their courage lingers in the echoes of their choices. To love in such a world was not just a feeling, it was an act of defiance. Every stolen moment, every shared secret was a protest against the cold arithmetic of survival. Still, not everyone could afford rebellion. Most accepted their roles, their arranged marriages, their quiet lives. They learned to build affection slowly after the vows were said. And though it may sound tragic, there was a certain beauty in that too. The slow, patient weaving of care between strangers who became partners through necessity. Sometimes those unions turned into true companionship. Two people, once bound by arrangement, finding laughter in each other's company, warmth in shared labor, comfort in routine. Love that did not begin in fire, but in coals that glowed softly through the years. It was not always romantic, but it was real. And perhaps that was the heart of medieval courtship. Not the grand gestures sung by minstrels, but the quiet endurance of love that learned to survive within its boundaries. Because in the end, every generation has its own rules for love, its own ways of breaking them. And as the centuries fade, what remains is not who obeyed, but who dared. So as you breathe slower now, imagine that world again. Narrow streets, soft moonlight, two figures meeting in secret, knowing the price of every word. And still, they choose to speak. Because even when love costs everything, silence costs more.
When we think of castles, we picture grandeur. Towering stone walls, flickering torches, velvet halls. But behind those walls, where laughter echoed and tapestries swayed in the candlelight, lived hearts that ached just like ours. And among those hearts, love often bloomed where it was least allowed to. For nobles, marriage was duty, an alliance forged in signatures and sealed with land. But the heart, wild and ungoverned, didn't care for treaties. It strayed into shadows where whispered vows felt more real than the gold bands exchanged at the altar. A countess might fall for her husband's squire, the one who brought her letters, his hands calloused, his eyes too honest. A prince might linger too long near a lady-in-waiting, drawn not by politics, but by the softness in her voice. Every look, every word, every risk carried 1,000 dangers. For them, love was a crime written in silence. The medieval court was a stage of masks. Outwardly, everyone obeyed. The ladies embroidered, the lords hunted, the priests preached. But behind tapestries, beneath candlelight, secrets were traded like gold. Lovers met at the edges of the night, in gardens and chambers, where the world shrank to two trembling souls who should not have met at all. It wasn't just temptation, it was starvation. A life ruled by duty left the heart hollow, and forbidden love filled that emptiness like a stolen breath.
Those who found it often described it not as joy, but as torment, a sweet ache that kept them awake in the dark. They prayed for peace, and yet prayed it would never end. Many of these stories are half-whispered through time. Chroniclers would not record them outright, but they survive in poems, in songs that were too beautiful to be entirely imagined. One tells of a queen who loved her knight so deeply that she sent him to distant wars just to hide her feelings. When his letters stopped coming, she stopped smiling. The bards called it devotion. The priests called it sin.
And yet, even in those hushed centuries, people knew the difference between lust and love, between hunger and truth. Love, real love, defied the cold order of the world. It did not care for birthright or bloodline. It asked only to be seen. When the nobles met in secret, they were not chasing pleasure, they were chasing recognition. A hand that lingered too long on silk, a voice that trembled when speaking a name. These were reminders that beneath the crowns and gowns, they were still human, still capable of trembling. But the higher one stood, the further there was to fall. A discovered affair could ruin entire families. Sometimes lovers were exiled, imprisoned, or worse. Castles could be merciless places, filled with eyes that watched and ears that listened, and still they dared. Because love has never been about safety. It has always been about truth, the kind that burns quietly, even when the world demands obedience. Some nobles found a strange compromise. They turned their love into art, disguising it in poetry and song. Troubadours carried those coded messages across kingdoms, singing of fair ladies and distant knights, never naming names, but always telling someone's story. And in that music, forbidden love found a way to live forever. Even now, centuries later, we can still feel it, that trembling defiance that made them human. Their castles have crumbled, their names forgotten, but the ache remains. Because every time someone chooses love over fear, their story is told again. So as you breathe in the quiet of the night, imagine those high towers under a pale moon, the soft rush of silk, the whisper of footsteps, two hearts beating faster than reason allows. Every secret glance a promise, every breath a prayer not to be discovered. And though their world is long gone, their longing remains, a timeless reminder that love, no matter the century, was never meant to obey.
Love, when it dared to touch the powerful, could ignite kingdoms. The thrones of Europe were not just seats of authority, they were traps woven with expectation, pride, and bloodlines. And when passion seeped into that web, it often burned hotter than any crown could withstand. Kings and queens were meant to embody perfection, loyalty, faith, and restraint. But behind those heavy crowns were men and women just as fragile as the peasants who served them. They too longed to be seen not as rulers, but as souls aching for connection. And in that longing, entire dynasties trembled. There was King Henry II of England and Eleanor of Aquitaine, a love turned war. She was one of the most powerful women of her time, fierce and unyielding. Their marriage began as a union of brilliance, passion, and politics. But pride, betrayal, and ambition soon turned it to ash. She rebelled against him, their sons at her side, turning affection into battle. Even in rebellion, their bond lingered, half love, half fury, the kind of connection that neither forgiveness nor vengeance could ever break. Then there was Queen Isabella of France, known to history as the She-Wolf.
Married to King Edward II, she watched her husband's affections drift toward his male favorites, men who wield his favor like weapons. Scorned and humiliated, Isabella turned her heartbreak into power. She gathered allies, invaded England, overthrew her husband, and ruled in his stead. Love had soured into legend, a reminder that a wounded heart can reshape nations.
And who could forget Abelard and Heloise, the philosopher and his brilliant student, whose forbidden affair defied both church and reason? Their letters still survive, filled with longing and intellect, faith and fury. When they were discovered, he was punished brutally, and she was forced into the convent. Yet through decades of separation, they wrote to one another with such honesty that even centuries later, their words still pulse with life. Love that could not be lived became immortal instead. Scandal was the echo of love uncontained. In royal courts, it spread faster than fire. Courtiers whispered, priests condemned, minstrels, emboldened by wine, wove tales that no one dared call true, but everyone believed. To fall in love was to play with ruin, and yet the greatest hearts always did. Even among kings, loneliness lingered like shadow. Some rulers arranged secret trysts under the cover of darkness, slipping past guards disguised as commoners. Others built entire wings of their castles to hide their mistresses. History remembers them as sinners and fools, but perhaps they were simply human, desperate for warmth in a world of marble and politics. One French queen, caught in an affair, was condemned not just by her husband, but by the poets who once adored her. Her name was wiped from songs, her portraits destroyed. Yet the whispers of her beauty, her laughter, her courage still ripple through the chronicles. Even silence cannot erase those who dared to love. There's something profoundly tragic in that, the way passion, when forced into secrecy, becomes both sacred and doomed. Each scandal, each forbidden affair was a battle between duty and desire, between the crown and the heart. And every time, the heart lost. But not completely.
Because though kings fell and queens wept, their stories lived on. The poets turned their sins into sonnets, their heartbreaks into history. And through that art, their love found its strange redemption. Even now, as you drift further towards sleep, their shadows linger. You can almost hear the echo of their voices, confessions whispered in marble halls, hearts that beat too loudly beneath layers of silk and steel. They remind us that love, no matter how high the walls, always finds a crack to slip through. And sometimes, that single crack is enough to shake a kingdom. So close your eyes and picture the flicker of candlelight over a jeweled crown, a monarch staring out into the dark, torn between empire and emotion. In that fragile silence, even the mightiest ruler is simply human again. Beneath the gilded courts and royal scandals, life for the common folk beat to a very different rhythm. In the villages and fields of the Middle Ages, love was not a game of thrones. It was survival, tenderness wrapped in toil, and affection forged in hardship. For peasants, love did not come with luxury. It came with mud, hunger, and the faint warmth of shared struggle. A peasant's day began long before dawn. The rooster's cry was their alarm, and the fields were their world. There was little time for dreaming, and even less for romance. Marriages were often arranged by families not for passion, but for practicality. The merging of land, labor, or livestock. A man might wed a woman not because his heart longed for her, but because she could milk cows, mend clothes, and bear children strong enough to work the soil.
Yet within these humble unions, love often bloomed quietly. Not the kind sung by minstrels or painted in tapestries, but something softer. Love that showed itself in small mercies, a shared loaf of bread, a hand offered after a long day in the fields, a whispered joke beneath the weight of endless work. There was beauty in their simplicity. When a peasant couple sat by the hearth after dusk, their faces lit by firelight, the world beyond their cottage walls ceased to exist. They spoke not of kingdoms or crusades, but of weather, harvests, and the health of their children. And though they owned little, their hearts carried a quiet richness, the kind that can only grow from endurance. Of course, life had its cruel edges. Many never married for love at all. Poverty left little room for choice. If a family needed to pay rent to their lord, a daughter might be given in marriage as part of the deal. A young man might be forced to wed an older widow simply to gain a roof over his head. In such unions, love was something that came later, if it came at all. And yet, even in that world of necessity, people still found ways to feel deeply. At the village festivals, when music filled the air and the ale flowed freely, glances were exchanged and hearts dared to race. Beneath the maypole or under the stars after the harvest, stolen moments were born, moments that could last a lifetime, or end with heartbreak and scandal. A girl might fall for the miller's son, even though her parents had promised her to a farmer 3 villages away. A shepherd might write love verses on scraps of parchment, never daring to deliver them. Such stories rarely ended well, but for a fleeting instant, they allowed these forgotten souls to feel something eternal, a spark that no lord could own.
When the church began to involve itself more deeply in marriage, love became bound by rules. Priests declared that weddings must be witnessed, vows spoken before God. But in remote places, peasants often married by troth, a promise made by hand and heart alone, without clergy or coin. Theirs was a love sanctified not by gold rings, but by calloused fingers entwined. Death, too, was always near, and that shadow deepened the meaning of love. To hold someone close in a world where tomorrow was uncertain was to defy despair itself. A husband might fall ill after a harsh winter. A wife might die giving birth. Yet even in grief, the survivors carried love like a sacred ember, fragile but never extinguished. For them, romance was not a grand tale. It was a thread that held the fabric of life together, a quiet force that made the hard days bearable. So when you think of medieval love, remember not just the nobles and their golden halls, but the peasants, their muddy feet, their rough laughter, their steadfast hearts. For while kings and queens sought love to ease their loneliness, peasants lived it daily, without words or grandeur. In their small homes, beside dying embers, they whispered to one another not of destiny or power, but of simple promises. I will be here tomorrow. I will keep you warm. I will not let the world take you from me. That, more than any crown or courtship, was love in its purest form. Love for the medieval peasant was often tested not by betrayal or jealousy, but by hunger. It was easy to speak of devotion when the harvest was good, when the bread rose golden and the livestock were healthy. But when famine swept through the villages, when the fields turned to dust and bellies went hollow, affection was measured not in words, but in sacrifice.
The winter months were the hardest. The days shortened, the earth hardened, and food became memory. Husbands would trudge miles through snow just to trade a small sack of grain. Wives would go hungry so their children might eat. And yet, through the hunger and cold, they found warmth in each other's company, a kind of quiet defiance against the world's indifference. In those times, love was not romantic, it was endurance. It was the shared silence of two people staring at an empty pot, still choosing to hold hands. It was the whispered comfort of a mother to her child, promising spring would come again, even when she herself doubted it. Some couples were torn apart by hardship. A poor man might be forced to leave his village to seek work in another lord's fields, or join a band of mercenaries just to send coins home.
many never returned. For those who stayed, every knock on the cottage door carried both hope and fear, a letter, a body, or nothing at all. Women, especially, bore the brunt of it. A widow left behind with children often had no rights to her husband's land. She might remarry out of necessity, not love, choosing survival over sentiment. And yet, even within such grim choices, affection could take root, not in passion, but in shared endurance, in the bond of simply staying alive together. There were times when famine led to unthinkable desperation. Records tell of couples stealing grain, of entire families caught poaching rabbits from noble forests. Punishments were severe, but love, that fierce instinct to protect one's own, often outweighed fear of the gallows. A husband might take the blame for his wife's theft. A mother might shield her child even under the whip. These were acts of love unspoken, but truer than any poet's vow.
And yet, amid the struggle, there were moments of grace. A kind neighbor leaving a loaf of bread at another's door. A weary couple dancing slowly at a midsummer gathering, just to remember they were still alive. Peasant life was cruel, but it was not joyless. Their laughter, though rare, came from the heart, honest and unguarded, like sunlight after a storm. Love for them was never about beauty or luxury. It was about endurance through the cold, compassion amid scarcity, loyalty in the face of despair. When two people promised to stand by one another, it was not poetry, it was survival. And yet, even as poverty stripped away their possessions, it could not take their tenderness. A peasant might have no coin to give, no dowry, no grand home, but he could offer his labor, his protection, his time. A woman might have no fine dress, no jewels, but she could offer her care, her laughter, her faith. In that way, their love was perhaps the most honest of all, stripped of pretense, bare as the soil beneath their feet. When night fell and the cold crept in, a single shared blanket could feel like paradise. The world beyond might have been ruled by kings and lords, but in that small space, that flicker of warmth in the dark, two souls found something richer than gold. And so love survived, not because life was kind, but because even in hunger, in loss, and in pain, the human heart refused to give up its capacity to care. Perhaps that is the most enduring truth of all, that the poorest of hearts, when filled with love, can still feel infinite. In the medieval world, love did not belong solely to those who felt it. It was watched, judged, and often controlled by the one power greater than any king, the Church. For in those centuries of devotion and fear, even the heart was not free.
To love was to walk a narrow path between holiness and sin. The Church saw marriage as sacred, a bond blessed only when sealed under its gaze. Anything beyond it, desire, lust, or secret affection, was branded as temptation, a crack through which the devil might creep. And so people learned to fear the very thing that made them human. Priests preached that true love was pure, untouched by flesh. They spoke of spiritual union, of the Virgin's perfection, of Christ as the model of devotion. But for ordinary men and women, love was messy, imperfect, and real. It lived not in cathedrals, but in whispers, in glances exchanged during Mass, in hands brushing together while carrying water from the well. Confession became the confessional of the heart's secret rebellions.
Peasants, nobles, even monks would kneel before their priests and speak of forbidden feelings. A woman desiring her neighbor's husband, a young man dreaming of a girl he could never marry. Each sin was counted, measured, forgiven, and yet love remained unconquered. Marriage, too, was never simple. The church turned it into ritual, ceremony, and law. No longer could two people simply promise themselves to each other beneath a tree or before their families. They needed witnesses, vows, blessings, and legitimacy. And for those who could not afford such ceremonies, love became invisible, sacred in the eyes of God perhaps, but not in the eyes of men. For the clergy, the rules were harsher still. Priests were forbidden from marrying, monks sworn to chastity. Yet history is filled with tales of temptation breaking even the strongest vows. Monks who fell in love with nuns, priests who fathered children in secret, bishops who lived double lives under the cloak of holiness. They preached purity, but were, at their core, as human as those they guided.
In monasteries, where silence ruled and walls rose high, desire became something both feared and worshipped. The heart was supposed to belong only to God, yet how could one deny the pulse of being alive? Some monks wrote poetry to express that longing, disguising love for another as love for the divine. Their verses, written in candlelight, still survive, haunting, tender, and filled with yearning they dared not name. And still the church's shadow loomed. Love outside marriage was punished harshly. Adultery could mean public shame, exile, or worse. Women bore the heavier weight, called sinners, forced to repent, while their lovers often walked free. The church taught that Eve's weakness had doomed mankind, and so every woman's desire was treated as a threat, something to be controlled, confessed, and cleansed. But even as sermons echoed through the stone halls, the heart resisted chains. Lovers met in secret, risking damnation for a touch, a kiss, a shared heartbeat in the dark, because love, the one thing that could not be caged, always found a way to bloom, even in the shadow of the cross. It is easy to imagine them, a priest praying for forgiveness, his fingers trembling as he remembers her face, a young couple whispering beneath the glow of a chapel's stained glass, afraid but unable to turn away. The church may have ruled their bodies, but never truly their souls. For love, in all its forbidden forms, became its own kind of faith. Not the kind written in Scripture, but the kind that burns quietly within, unyielding and pure, the one thing no sermon could erase. And so the people learned to live in two worlds, one of devotion and duty, and one of longing and light. Between them the heart beat on, quietly defiant, forever reaching toward the forbidden.
In the medieval world, love did not belong solely to those who felt it. It was watched, judged, and often controlled by the one power greater than any king, the church. For in those centuries of devotion and fear, even the heart was not free. To love was to walk a narrow path between holiness and sin. The church saw marriage as sacred, a bond blessed only when sealed under its gaze. Anything beyond it, desire, lust, or secret affection, was branded as temptation, a crack through which the devil might creep. And so, people learned to fear the very thing that made them human. Priests preached that true love was pure, untouched by flesh. They spoke of spiritual union, of the Virgin's perfection, of Christ as the model of devotion. But for ordinary men and women, love was messy, imperfect, and real. It lived not in cathedrals, but in whispers, in glances exchanged during Mass, in hands brushing together while carrying water from the well. Confession became the confessional of the heart's secret rebellions,
Peasants, nobles, even monks would kneel before their priests and speak of forbidden feelings. A woman desiring her neighbor's husband. A young man dreaming of a girl he could never marry. Each sin was counted, measured, forgiven, and yet love remained unconquered. Marriage, too, was never simple. The church turned it into ritual, ceremony, and law. No longer could two people simply promise themselves to each other beneath a tree or before their families. They needed witnesses, vows, blessings, and legitimacy. And for those who could not afford such ceremonies, love became invisible, sacred in the eyes of God, perhaps, but not in the eyes of men. For the clergy, the rules were harsher still. Priests were forbidden from marrying, monks sworn to chastity. Yet history is filled with tales of temptation breaking even the strongest vows. Monks who fell in love with nuns, priests who fathered children in secret, bishops who lived double lives under the cloak of holiness. They preached purity, but were, at their core, as human as those they guided. In monasteries, where silence ruled and walls rose high, desire became something both feared and worshipped. The heart was supposed to belong only to God, yet how could one deny the pulse of being alive? Some monks wrote poetry to express that longing, disguising love for another as love for the divine. Their verses, written in candlelight, still survive, haunting, tender, and filled with yearning they dared not name. And still the church's shadow loomed. Love outside marriage was punished harshly. Adultery could mean public shame, exile, or worse. Women bore the heavier weight, called sinners, forced to repent, while their lovers often walked free. The church taught that Eve's weakness had doomed mankind, and so every woman's desire was treated as a threat, something to be controlled, confessed, and cleansed. But even as sermons echoed through the stone halls, the heart resisted chains. Lovers met in secret, risking damnation for a touch, a kiss, a shared heartbeat in the dark. Because love, the one thing that could not be caged, always found a way to bloom, even in the shadow of the cross. It is easy to imagine them, a priest praying for forgiveness, his fingers trembling as he remembers her face, a young couple whispering beneath the glow of a chapel's stained glass, afraid but unable to turn away. The church may have ruled their bodies, but never truly their souls.
For love, in all its forbidden forms, became its own kind of faith, not the kind written in Scripture, but the kind that burns quietly within, unyielding and pure, the one thing no sermon could erase. And so the people learned to live in two worlds, one of devotion and duty, and one of longing and light. Between them, the heart beat on, quietly defiant, forever reaching toward the forbidden. In the quiet sanctuaries of medieval monasteries and convents, love took on strange and silent shapes. Behind walls meant to keep the world out, hearts still stirred, proof that even devotion to God could not silence the whisper of human desire. For the monk, love was a battle fought within. He rose before dawn, cloaked in cold air and ritual, his voice joining others in chanting prayers that echoed through stone. His days were marked by discipline, silence, labor, obedience. Yet somewhere between the psalms and the candlelight, the mind wandered, perhaps to the sound of laughter from a nearby convent, or to the memory of a face seen long ago in the village square. To love as a monk was to be haunted. He was not allowed to hold, nor to touch, nor to dream of any woman, and yet he did, not because he wanted to sin, but because he was human.
And the more he tried to bury that part of himself, the more it grew, like ivy on the monastery walls, twisting toward the light. In those centuries, monasteries and convents were not entirely cut off. They traded with nearby towns, they tended gardens, and sometimes they wrote letters. And in those letters, between lines of prayer and scripture, affection would slip through. Cautious, coded, but undeniable. A simple phrase such as, "I pray for your soul daily," could mean something more, something dangerous.
For nuns, the struggle was even quieter. Many were sent to convents, not by choice, but by duty, families unable to provide dowries or seeking to preserve inheritance. Inside those cold stone walls, they found a strange kind of sisterhood, but also a loneliness that gnawed through the hours of silence. They sang hymns of devotion, but their songs often carried a yearning too deep to hide. Some wrote poetry, verses of longing cloaked in religious imagery. Their words to Christ read like love letters, trembling between piety and passion. The line between divine love and human love blurred until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. There are real records of nuns who broke their vows, who slipped into the night to meet lovers at the monastery's edge, who wept when their secret was uncovered. Some were forgiven, others punished, a few cast out entirely. Yet even those who stayed within the walls often carried that secret ache, the desire to feel alive, beyond the prayers, beyond the rules. There were also stories whispered among the laity of monks and nuns who shared forbidden affection not in lust but in understanding. They were souls trapped in the same sacred cage, seeking comfort in each other's presence. Sometimes they met in the gardens during dawn prayers. Sometimes they spoke only through letters, never daring to touch. To the church, these were sins. To those who lived them, they were moments of truth. The heart that loves cannot simply stop beating because it is told to. It longs, it remembers, it resists. Imagine a monk kneeling in prayer, eyes closed, his mind wandering to the soft voice of a nun he met once while tending the monastery's orchard. He prays harder, hoping to silence the thought, but instead finds his prayer turning into something else. A plea, not to be freed of feeling, but to be forgiven for having it.
These quiet rebellions never made it into sermons. They were buried under centuries of doctrine and silence. But love, even when hidden, leaves traces. In the letters scholars find, in the poetry written under assumed names, in the frescoes that depict saints with eyes too human, too sorrowful. For in every age, even under the heaviest chains, love finds a language of its own. In the Middle Ages, it spoke in whispers between cloisters, in the rustle of robes, in the quiver of candle flames that refuse to go out. And perhaps that is what made it most powerful, that even in a world where the church ruled every breath, love still dared to exist, quietly, tenderly, defiantly. In the glittering halls of medieval courts, love was rarely gentle. Beneath the silks, jewels, and measured courtesies, passion burned, dangerous, intoxicating, and forbidden. Nobles lived behind walls of wealth and etiquette, but the heart cared little for protocol. And in that world of arranged marriages and political alliances, love became rebellion. To fall for the wrong person could undo an entire family's fortune, yet that danger was part of the allure. The court was a stage where glances carried meaning, where a smile could risk a scandal, and where secrets were whispered behind fans and goblets of wine. Every feast, every dance, every slow walk through the garden was laced with tension. A lord's wife might catch the gaze of a visiting knight. A lady-in-waiting might linger too long near the king's cousin. Every move was watched, but that only made the game more thrilling. Desire grew in the shadows, not despite the rules, but because of them. For noble women, love was a luxury they could rarely afford. Their marriages were contracts, their bodies tokens of alliance. They were traded like land, sealed into unions that promised peace, not affection. But behind the ceremony, their hearts sometimes strayed. A letter hidden in a prayer book, a lock of hair pressed into wax, small, reckless acts that carried enormous risk.
Men, too, were bound by duty, though not as tightly. A nobleman's affair might stain his reputation, but a noblewoman's could destroy her entirely. Still, both sides played their dangerous games, navigating a world where love could mean ruin. And yet, they loved anyway. History remembers their scandals not as fleeting gossip, but as echoes of defiance. Think of Eleanor of Aquitaine, a queen, a legend, a woman whose heart refused to stay silent. She was a patron of the troubadours, those wandering poets who sang of passion, longing, and heartbreak. Through her courts, the culture of courtly love flourished, a strange blend of poetry and peril that gave nobles permission to dream, if not to act. Courtly love, though idealized, opened a door for emotional rebellion. Men wrote songs for women who were forbidden to them. Women responded in riddles and rhymes, weaving their feelings into coded verses. To the church, it was harmless entertainment. To those living it, it was a secret outlet for their very real hunger to feel. A lady might sit in her chamber, listening to her troubadour sing beneath her window, his voice trembling through the cool night air. The song spoke of stars, loyalty, and the pain of distance, but everyone knew it was really about her. Her heart raced, but she could not answer, not with words, not with touch. Her silence was her only protection. Yet silence did not mean peace. Rumors spread fast in the noble courts. A misplaced glance could birth a scandal, and scandal was poison. Ladies who strayed too close to temptation risked exile, confinement, even death. Men who pursued them could lose their lands or their lives, and still they risked it. For in a world built on power, love became the most intoxicating form of rebellion. Behind the curtains and under the sound of harps, there were secrets, love letters sealed with wax, meetings arranged under moonlight, a kiss stolen in the chapel. Servants carried messages, maids looked the other way, and the walls of stone hid stories that would never be told aloud. But every secret had its cost. Sometimes the whispers reached the wrong ears. A jealous husband, a suspicious queen, a priest with too much curiosity. One wrong move, and passion turned to peril. Lovers who once whispered promises were dragged before courts, their hearts laid bare for judgment. And yet, despite the risks, despite the ruin, love continued to bloom in those high towers and candlelit chambers. Because power could command obedience, but never devotion. Nobles built their kingdoms through conquest and alliance, but in quiet, stolen moments, they remembered what it meant to simply feel. It was dangerous. It was foolish. But in a world where every move was calculated, love remained the only thing that could not be controlled. In the grand courts of Europe, love was never a private thing. It was political, dangerous, and often explosive. A single affair could topple alliances, start wars, or end dynasties. And yet, the forbidden thrill of passion was irresistible, even to kings and queens whose hearts were meant to serve only their thrones. In the quiet of royal chambers, beneath the weight of crowns and velvet, real human longings still stirred. Kings, for all their power, were often lonely men, trapped in arranged marriages, meant to unite kingdoms, not hearts. Queens, too, lived under the gaze of entire nations, their every smile and step measured against duty. Yet behind the ceremony, behind the golden facades, were hearts that beat with the same restless rhythm as any peasant's. History remembers the scandals, because in a world of rigid order, they were small earthquakes. There was King Henry VIII of England and his famed mistress, Rosamund Clifford. Fair Rosamund, the poets called her. Their love, whispered through corridors and cloaked gardens, defied both marriage and morality.
When the queen, Eleanor of Aquitaine, discovered the affair, legend says she found Rosamond's secret chamber and forced her to choose between poison and the dagger. History cannot confirm the tale, but its endurance tells us what people believed, that passion, once unleashed, could be deadly. The French courts were no calmer. King Philip IV's daughters-in-law were accused of adultery, a scandal that shook the kingdom to its foundations. 2 of them were imprisoned for life, their supposed lovers executed. Whether true or not, the message was clear. In a world ruled by image, love was the most dangerous betrayal. And yet those in power could not stop themselves. Henry VIII of England would change religion itself, tearing his country from the Catholic Church, all for the love, or perhaps obsession, of Anne Boleyn. He broke the laws of faith and the unity of his people, chasing a heart that ultimately cost her life. In his passion, he showed the world how love could alter history itself. But not all forbidden loves were royal. There were dukes who fell for ladies-in-waiting, queens who found comfort in their knights, and courtiers whose affairs with nobility led to exile, torture, or execution. To love beyond one's rank was to gamble everything. Yet they did, because even in castles built of marble and power, the ache for tenderness could not be silenced. Imagine a ball in a candle-lit hall. Laughter echoes, music swells. A young nobleman meets the eyes of a married lady across the room. Their glances linger longer than they should. In that instant, they both know the danger, and yet they dance. Every step, every brush of a hand is a secret. Behind their smiles, their hearts race with both fear and desire. It is madness, yes, but it is the only thing that makes them feel alive. Servants became silent witnesses to such stories. They carried secret letters, arranged midnight meetings, and protected the reputations of their masters. Many of these romances never left the walls they were born within, yet some escaped, spreading like wildfire through gossip and rumor. And in a time when reputation was worth more than life, rumor was a weapon sharper than any sword. Still, for every affair that ended in ruin, another lived quietly, hidden in the margins of history. Love that defied thrones, faiths, and fear, the kind that existed not for power, but for the sheer, reckless beauty of it. Because even in the grandest courts, beneath the weight of crowns and politics, people remained human. They longed to be seen not as rulers or pawns, but simply as souls yearning for connection. And that yearning, so simple, so dangerous, has shaped the stories of kings and queens ever since. Love could build kingdoms, and it could destroy them. It could inspire poets or end in blood. But no matter how high the stakes, it was always worth the risk. For to live without love, even for those born to rule, was the cruelest fate of all. And so, as the embers of the fire fade and the night deepens, we leave behind the candlelit corridors of castles and the quiet cloisters of monasteries. The medieval world, a place of iron and incense, of vows and violins, slips once more into silence. We have wandered through a time when love was currency, when hearts were traded for land, when every glance carried the weight of risk. We have seen peasants who courted with carved spoons, and nobles who wrote poetry in secret. We've walked beside monks whose prayers trembled with longing, and queens whose hearts burned behind veils of duty. And what we've learned, perhaps, is that love has never been simple. It has never belonged to one class or one creed. Whether whispered in a peasant's field or sung beneath a royal balcony, love was always the quiet rebellion, the proof that no matter how harsh the world became, something soft and human still survived. In the medieval night, people found ways to love without words. A ribbon tied to a sword, a look exchanged through candlelight, a prayer whispered not to heaven, but to someone they could never touch. The church could warn against it,
Kings could outlaw it, but love endured, in secret, in poetry, in every heartbeat that refused to be still. Perhaps that's the real lesson of those centuries gone by, that even when lives were short and rules unyielding, people still sought connection, still dreamed, still reached for one another, even when the world told them not to.
Tonight, as you close your eyes, imagine the world they lived in. The quiet hum of a medieval village, the distant bells from a chapel tower, the flicker of a torchlight in a castle hall. And somewhere in that soft dark, two souls meet. Just for a moment, just long enough to know what it means to feel. Let the weight of their stories settle over you like a blanket. Let their courage and their longing drift into your dreams. The past is not gone. It breathes through every whisper, every heartbeat, every act of love that dares to exist. So breathe deeply. Let the echoes of that world fade into the calm of the present. You're safe here. The fire is low. The night is kind. And the stories have done their work. History may be filled with war and power, but love is what remains. And when morning comes, you'll remember not the battles or the laws, but the quiet truth that connects all of us, across time and centuries. The simple, eternal desire to be known, to be seen, to be loved. Sleep well, traveler of the night. Tomorrow will bring a new dawn. But for now, let the past keep you company. Let the gentle rhythm of history guide you into rest.